it going, everybody? Welcome to another $15 deck tech video, and I just have to go ahead and say, it's technically a lie this time. This deck is a little more than $15 because it took a while for me to actually make this video. By the time I finished the deck's price had actually gone up. Whether that's in direct response to this particular commander getting more popular, I'm uncertain, but he is a newer commander, so maybe that is the case. Apologies, the deck is about $1.50 over $15 this time due to that discrepancy, so that could probably break the bank for some of you. I'm sorry. I know that would definitely take the deck out of my price point. So just be wary when you are grabbing the deck. It is $1.50 more than I originally intended it to be because of that building discrepancy. But what commander are we building today? We are building Riku of Many Paths. Now, this is either the best commander for people who are indecisive or have ADHD, or this is the worst commander for those people. It depends on how bad you are at analysis paralysis. So anytime you cast a modal spell, choose up to X, where X is the number of times you choose a mode for a spell. So a modal spell is any spell that has multiple modes on it. So the cards like the Spree cards that came out in the set with Riku, or any of things like the Wreck and Rebuild, the choose one or choose two cards, these are all modal cards. So, what benefit do we get from casting these cards? Well, we can either impulse draw, exile the top card of our library, and until the end of the next turn we can play it, so that's pretty good. Or we can put a 1/1 counter on Riku and give it trample, so that's a Voltron strategy we have access to. Or we can put a 1/1 blue bird creature token into play that has flying, which can be useful for keeping the dragon player from eating our nutsack. All in all, lots of really good abilities. He's got a little bit of what Talrond does. He's got a little bit of what a spell-slinging draw commander can do. And he's got a little bit of what Veyron does with her prowess ability. Just, it's permanent, and it's a pretty interesting commander design. I'm not going to lie. I actually really, really like it. So we are going to figure out how we can build this on a budget, so this incredibly interesting commander can be in your hands very, very shortly. We have a few goals we need to do. We need to make sure that we're not dirtling around too much, but we also have to make sure that we are decisively moving towards a strategy. So what is our strategy going to be? Well, it's in that last little effect of Riku, creating the 1/1 blue birds. That is going to be the angle we are going to be focusing on. Now, while playing Riku, you will probably be using his exile the top card of your library and playing it ability more than anything else. So we are going to add the token generation abilities into the 99 of the deck and let that be what supplements Riku so that he can be a draw engine for us primarily. And if we are in a situation where it's advantageous to just stack 1/1 counters on him and turn him into a cudgel, then I guess we will be going that route as well. But there's one other issue. Modal spells tend to be very, very expensive. We're talking 4 to 6 mana, not dollars, mana. They tend to be very expensive, which also means that people don't tend to put high price tags on them, which is good for us as budget builders, but it is a bit bad when we are deck building and almost everything in the deck has a high CMC. In fact, when we look at the numbers for this deck specifically, we find that we've got a average mana value of 3.21, which outside of a landfall deck is kind of ludicrous. Like landfall dragons, mono green stompy, these kinds of really, really big dirtily decks really want giant haymaker cards to be the bread and butter of what they're doing, and that's not what we're doing. Spellslinger decks tend to focus more on having low mana cards they can use over and over again to trigger their commander's ability. So we're in a bit of a strange spot. So to facilitate that, we're gonna go ahead and start off with the ramp package, and we're gonna be using a very thick one, all things considered. Riku is going to have a 16 card ramp package, much more than I would normally put in a non-landfall, non-big mana style deck, but we are kind of a big mana deck, just not in the traditional way, not in the like we're trying to cast a Debt to the Deathless to kill somebody in a single spell kind of way, where we're trying to do a big storm turn kind of way, but just We absolutely need our deck to be able to function, and it does not function without lots and lots of lands. So let's go ahead and begin with Road and Ruin. Instant, search your library for basic land, drop it on the battlefield. Already really good, and its aftermath lets us destroy anything, any creature basically. Ruin deals damage to target creature equal to the number of lands you control. We'll probably have a decent bit of lands because of how the deck functions, so that is actually pretty good for us. Then we have Dance of the Tumbleweeds, modal spell, so of course this works with our commander. Search your library for a basic land or desert, put in the battlefield, then Shuffle. Really, really good rampant growth that can get us deserts if we decided to go that route. Or we can create a X green elemental where X is the number of lands we control. So sometimes we'll drop 6 mana into it just to make that big elemental token, but most of the time we're going to drop 3 mana just to say we casted a modal ramp spell. Mocking Sprite, flying, instant and sorcery spells we have cost 1 less to cast. Same with Goblin Electromancer, that does that as well. Goblin Anachromancer does that as well. Haughty Djinn does that as well. Sorry, Anachromancer says that each spell you cast that's red or green costs 1 less to cast, but that's a lot of stuff in our deck. Haughty Djinn makes all of our instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast, and its power is equal to the number of instant and sorceries in our graveyard. That could end up being a way to close out a game later. Mystics of Magnus is another card that drops the cost of all of our instants and sorceries, and whenever you cast an instant or sorcery, you get to put an experience counter on it if its mana value is greater than the number of experience counters that you have already, which works really well for us because it means that as we are casting our bigger and larger modal spells, we are going to be discounting their cost 1 by 1, and even if we lose Mizzix, we keep those experience counters, so if we find a way to recur him later on in the game, say you do a deck upgrade and throw a Balagad recovery in here, Mizzix will continue to benefit you even after he is gone. Magnus of the Red is the top end of our ramp section. Instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast for each creature token you control. We, of course, can spawn tokens with Riku. And whenever it deals combat damage to a player, make a 3/3 spawn creature token. This is a super strong card in a deck like this. Then we have Wizards of Thay. Instants and sorceries cost 1 less to cast, and sorceries can now be cast at instant speed. We have 19 sorceries in the deck, so this will benefit the other 21 instants that are in the deck. Basically, if this is out, we are running a deck with 40 instant spells. Very, very powerful, very, very reflexive to whatever the situation may be that we're dealing with. But on to regular basic ramp spells. We've got Rampant Growth to get a basic land out of the deck, Wayfarer's Bauble to get a basic land out of the deck, Arcane Signet to tap for 1 mana of any color, Forger's Foundry to give us a blue mana, and if it's spent to cast an instant or sorcery spell with mana value 3 or less, we may exile that spell instead of putting it into the graveyard, and then we can cast any number of the spells that we have used with it. So Forger's Foundry is going to get us double use out of our ramp pieces, and any of these smaller modal spells that don't necessarily do a ton, this will actually help a lot. A lot of our spree spells actually work very well with this too. Then we have Font of Fertility, sack it to get a basic land out of our library. Dawn Treader Elk, same thing, sack it to get a basic land out of the library. And Search for Tomorrow, search your library for a basic land, put it on the battlefield. It also allows us to suspend it on turn 1, so no matter what, we have a turn 1 play available to us. But of course, every deck needs a draw engine, and we are running with a very small draw engine because we are going to be relying a little heavier on the impulse draw of Riku, and draw is stapled onto the end of several of our modal cards, but we do have a few cards that have a dedicated job of drawing us stuff. With 6 of them, in fact, let's go ahead and start with Eureka Moment. Draw 2 cards and put a land from your hand onto the battlefield. So we are mixing some ramp in with our draw to make sure that our big modal spells can be cast more often. Urban Evolution, draw 3 cards and play a land this turn. Again, same thing as Eureka Moment, but at sorcery speed. Metamorphic Blast, one of the new spree cards, instant. Until end of turn, target creature with his base power becomes 0/1. And yeah, that's an easy way to have a fun combat trick, or we can make a player draw 2 cards. Or we can do both. Honestly, a fun trick would be swinging Riku into somebody and they block with just enough power to get over Riku, and then, or just a little bit over, and then we Metamorphic Blast their strongest thing, turning it into a white rabbit that doesn't have the ability to kill Riku anymore. And also, using the second part of the spree, we're drawing 2 cards and triggering Riku twice, giving us either a bird to block with or a draw on top of giving him the 1/1 counter and trample, punishing somebody for trying to just chump block us, basically. So that very, very decent card, and you can find a lot of uses for it in here. Academy Wall, whenever we cast an instant or sorcery spell, we may draw a card and then discard a card once per turn. Wind Rider Wizard, if we cast an instant sorcery or a wizard spell, draw a card and then discard a card. Of course, Riku is a wizard as well, so this gives us a little bit of looting throughout our deck. And then we have Wave Break Hippocamp when we cast our first spell during every opponent's turn, which again, we have 21 instants, 40 if you count when Wizards of Thay is out. This will give us one singular draw. Stuff that is super, super useful. But before we get into our modal spells, we also need to make sure that the other problem of modal spells is solved. So when you're playing a deck with a lot of modal spells, even though they give you a lot of flexibility, you tend to overspend mana for the effects that you get. And while that is what our deck is trying to do, it's why we have so much ramp compensating for it, we need to find a way to get more oomph out of those spells. So I've also included a 3-card spell copies section into this deck. These are cards that will allow us to get more bang for our buck out of our modal spells, beginning with Double Vision. Double Vision says our first instant or sorcery spell each turn manages to get copied. You may choose new targets for the copy. That's each turn, not just each of our turns. So make sure you're only casting one spell on your turn while this is out, and then casting subsequent spells on other players' turns. Swarm Intelligence is the same thing, but for 2 more mana, it just copies any instance or sorcery we play, irrespective of the situation. Then we have Calamax, the Storm Sire. Whenever you cast your first instant spell each turn, if Storm Sire is tapped, we get to copy that spell. And whenever we copy an instant or sorcery spell or instant spell, we get to put a 1/1 counter on Calamax. So we won't get benefit out of our sorceries with this, but with the 21 instants the deck does have, Calamax will give us a huge boost for these. Also, giving him a 1/1 counter for this means that this guy will eventually turn into a bludgeon we can throw at people as well. People will not allow Calamax to sit on the board because they have PTSD from Calamax Storm. Trust me. Then we have a 24-card interaction and removal suite. Now, that may seem very, very huge, but it's because these are, of course, modal spells. So sometimes they are interaction spells, sometimes they will be tutoring spells, sometimes they will be ramp spells, sometimes they will be draw spells, but their primary function is to give us access to that removal, beginning with Emerald Charm, destroy a non-aura enchantment, or untap a target permanent, or target creature loses flying. Pretty good for 1 mana. Explosive Derailment, one of the spree cards. We can choose as many modes as we need, depending on the mana. Deal 4 damage to target creature, or blow up an artifact. Well, and/or. So for 3 mana, we get 1. For 5 mana, we get both, triggering Riku multiple times. Slight Malfunction, we can either destroy an artifact or roll a 6-sided die, and then deal 1 damage to each of up to X target creatures, where X is the result. So we can turn an elf token board into Swiss cheese with this, or, you know, more likely, we're going to roll a 1 and cry, but it's fine because you got the choice. Artistic Refusal, this will let us use our tokens to pay for its convoke cost. We get to counter a spell or draw 2 cards and discard a card, but we get to do both if we want to as well, which of course will help Riku out because that is 2 modes chosen. Then we have Wreck and Rebuild, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or mill 5 and put a land from our graveyard onto the battlefield. It's got flashback, so we are going to get double use out of this guy. Rain of Thorns, blow up an artifact, or blow up an enchantment, or blow up a land, but it says 1 or more, so we're just going to pay 6 mana into this, get a 1/1 counter on Riku, get an impulse draw off Riku, and then get another creature on the board off of Riku. Just, you know what, it's overcosted, but that is the problem with modal spells that we will be solving with our gigantic ramp package. Then we have Over the Edge. Choose 1, destroy target artifact or enchantment, or a creature we control explores, then explores again. So that is a way to give us a little bit of advantage if we don't necessarily need that explosive effect. Supreme Will is a counter spell that also lets us look at the top 4 cards of our library and put 1 of them into our hand if we need it. Causium Confluence, choose 3. All the confluence spells are so good in Riku. Choose 3. You may choose the same one more than once. Search your library for a cave card, put it in the battlefield tapped, or put 3 1/1 counters on a cave you control, or blow up an enchantment. Honestly, sometimes we're just going to pay 5 into this and then look at our opponents and go, 3 enchantments. They're all gone. Collective Defiance. It's got Escalate, which is like Spree if Wizards of the Coast was from a few years ago. 3 mana, pay 1 mana to add more effects onto this. Target player discards all the cards in their hand, then draws that many cards to a wheel. Deal 4 damage to a creature, or deal 3 damage to target opponent or planeswalker. So we can snipe a planeswalker, snipe a creature, and then also wheel our hand away, or tell a person that they have to get rid of their hand if we know they've tutored something into it that they want to keep. Confounding Riddle, choose 1, counter a spell unless our opponent pays 4, or look at the top 4 cards of our library, put 1 into our hand, the rest to the graveyard. It's just Supreme Will again, but basically power crept. Shifting Grit, spree card. We can use more of these abilities as we pay more mana. Exchange control of 2 target creatures, or artifacts, or enchantments. Hand somebody a mana rock and take their Bolas's Citadel. That's all I will say. That's all you need to do. Our deck has 5 artifacts. Our deck has 4 enchantments, and our deck has tons of creature tokens. Oftentimes we're going to be just taking somebody's commander with this, but sometimes we will be able to just yank away an important piece to somebody. Or like, again, in the case of Bolas's Citadel, let's say that the aristocrat player with a bunch of life just got hung up on a land and they're about to go off on their turn. Hand their Bolas's Citadel to like the dragon player on the other end of the table who doesn't have a whole lot of life left because of the other guy's Zulaport Cutthroat. That will stave off the big Bolas's Citadel turn for you, or like yanking the Omniscience away from somebody and giving it to yourself, or the elf player who didn't need it in the first place. There's all kinds of ways you can abuse this particular card. Then we have you find the villain's lair, counter a spell, or draw 2 cards and discard 2 cards. Modes are good for counter spells in Riku. Temur Charm, choose 1, counter a spell unless they pay 3. Creatures power 3 or less can't block this turn, or target creature gets 1/1 and then fights a creature. Quandrix Command, choose 2, counter an artifact or enchantment spell, or put 2/1/1s on a creature, or target player shuffles up to 3 cards in their graveyard into their library, taking the reanimation away from a player. Merit of Clendel Toth player is about to pull up their Arcana Cruelty, and you just go, ha-ha, no. Very, very fun card. Or return a creature or planeswalker to its owner's hand. You get 2 of them, so we get 2 triggers of Riku off that. Is it Charm? Choose 1, counter a non-creature spell unless they pay 2, deal 2 damage to a creature, or draw 2, discard 2. Clan Defiance, we pay X into this, and we get to choose 1 or more. Deal X damage to target creature with flying, or deal X damage to creature without flying, or deal X damage to a player or a planeswalker. Also, you can just pay 2 mana and choose to deal 0 to everything just to get 3 triggers of Riku. You know, if you're feeling spicy. Then we have Inscription of Abundance. It's got Kicker, which lets us choose any number of these if we kick it. So for 2 mana, we choose 1. For 5 mana, we choose all. Put 2/1 counters on a creature. Target player gains X life, where X is the greatest power among creatures they control, or target creature fights a creature that the player doesn't control. Super, super straightforward. We're just going to make Riku big and then punch somebody in the throat with it. Mishra's Command, choose 2. Choose a player. They discard up to X cards and draw a card for each card discarded this way, or deal X to a creature, or deal X to a planeswalker, or give a creature XO and then haste until end of turn. You can literally just use this in order to give Riku his trample from his own trigger and give him enough power to just punch somebody in the nose really, really hard, and then the game is over for that person. Again, pick the player who's about to go off super strong or who's been oppressing you all game, and you just turn them into Swiss cheese with this. Super strong card. Fiery Confluence, choose 3, deal 1 damage to every creature, 2 damage to each opponent, or blow up an artifact. Hey, again, sometimes you just need to hit a bunch of mana rocks with this. Sometimes you got somebody with a mana crypt and a soul ring out, and you're just like, what if we set you back to the Stone Age, Will? Speaking of Will, Insidious Will, counter a spell, or choose new targets for a spell, or copy an instant or sorcery spell, and then choose new targets for the copy. Super, super strong card in this particular deck. Archmage's Charm, with the latest reprint, this card has gotten much less expensive. Choose 1, counter a spell, or a creature person draws 2 cards, or gain control of a non-land permanent with mana value 1 or less. Boy howdy, I mentioned Mana Crypt and Soul Ring, right? Cool. Glad we're on the same page of what to steal with this. Mystic Confluence, choose 3, counter a spell unless somebody pays 3, return a creature to its owner's hand, or draw a card. Pick any 3 of those, and you know what? You will be served very well with the commander we have chosen. Riku benefits from all of that stuff. Then we have Kamal's Will. Choose 1 if you control a commander as you get cast the spell. Choose both. Until end of turn, any number of target lands you control become 1/1 elemental creature tokens with Vigilance, Indestructible, and Haste. And choose target creature you don't control. Each creature you control deals damage equal to its power to that creature. So this is one of the ways we're just going to win the game outright. We turn all of our lands into 1/1s, and then with a card I'll show you later, we will turn them into gigantic threats that will close out the game. 2 cards I'll actually be able to show you later. So keep Kamal's will in mind as we look into the rest of the deck. Finally, now we have to find a way to actually end the game and make sure that our important game pieces can stay in our hands so that we can still function later on in the game. So this is going to be where we have our spells that do non-specific things that are still important for how the deck will function, our spells that will cause us to win the game as we use them, and the spells that we will recur cards with. Beginning with the small recursion section, only 2 cards here. One is Survivor's Bond. Either put a human creature from your graveyard to your hand or put a non-human creature from our graveyard to our hand. There are 16 creatures in the deck, but every one of them is very important to the deck's strategy. Then we have Gale, Waterdeep Prodigy. When you cast an instant or sorcery spell, cast the other one from your graveyard. So if you cast an instant, cast a sorcery from your graveyard, or vice versa. If a spell is cast this way, put it in exile as well. So this way we can double up on the uses of our cards in our graveyard after we have casted them. Then we have what I'm going to lovingly call the ADHD pile. This is the pile that functions very, very well for what the deck is doing, but they are very non-specific in purpose. Cynic Charm can protect our stuff, give a creature 3/3 until end of turn, or all of our permanents gain hexproof, or bounce a creature to its owner's hand. Titania's Command, exile target player's graveyard, so its interaction, gain a life for every card exiled this way. Or search your library for 2 lands, put them on the battlefield tapped. Lands, any kind of lands. Or make 2 bears, or put 2 1/1 counters on every creature you control. So if we have a board state set up with Titania's Command, we can just cast this and then immediately create a gigantic board state. Things that were 1/1s from Riku are now 3/3s and potentially lethal. Then we have Primal Command. Choose 2. Target player gains 7 life. Put a non-creature permanent on top of his owner's library. Target player shuffles the graveyard into their library, or search your library for any creature card, reveal it, and put it into your hand. If we're casting this, we are probably searching for Magnus, because he can turn our boards into just wonderful states of power. Then we have Verdant Confluence. Choose 3. Put 2 1/1 counters on a creature. Or you can just, put 6 1/1 counters on Riku this way. And 9 if you count using his ability. So you have, 6 1/1 counters from the Verdant Confluence, then 1 1/1 counter and trample from Riku, then the draw from the Riku, then the token from the Riku. Sorry, you don't actually get 3 individual Riku triggers, you get 3 instances of the Riku modes. Or search your library for a basic land, put on the battlefield tapped, and then shuffle. So more ramp, more power for Riku. Then we have a way to just flat out win the game. With Choose Your Weapon, double target creature's power and toughness until end of turn. It's a choose 1 spell as well. It can also deal 5 damage to a creature with flying. So with Choose Your Weapon, we are literally just going to aim Riku at a person, and then if they decide not to block or they decide to chump block, then we activate Choose Your Weapon, giving Riku 1/1 and trample until end of turn, and then we double his power and toughness, turning him into a potentially lethal creature. And then we have Savage Alliance escalate, so we can use any number of these. Either a creature gains trample until end of turn, creature's target player controls, so even ours, deal 2 damage to each, 1 damage to each creature and opponent controls, or 2 damage to target creature. So we can use this to wipe a board of little tokens, we can use this to kill a small mana dork, or we can use this to give all of our tokens a little bit more oomph. Most importantly, though, it is an instant card that lets us choose, so Riku benefits from all of that. Remember, even when your cards are not providing absolute value in and of themselves, Riku will turn them into value with his own triggers. Then we have the spell triggers for win conditions section. These are the big boys. If these are out, we are in a very, very dominant state on the board. So this is Talrin Sky Summoner. Every time we cast an instant or sorcery spell, again, our deck has 40 of those. Make a 2/2 blue Drake with flying. This allows us to just focus on Riku's ability of giving us Impulse Draw to get through our deck. So Talrin is going to give us our creatures with flying we need to win the game. Balamor Battle Mage Captain gives all of our creatures 1/0 and trample until end of turn every time we cast an instant or a sorcery spell. So if we're generating tokens with Talrund or Riku or Magnus, This is going to turn all of them into bigger creatures. You'll notice that's kind of a theme. But let's say that we need to make our creatures even larger. Well, Sakashima's Will, we can target, it's a modal spell, so we get to choose one. If our commander's out, we choose both, which of course benefits Riku. We can then cause a opponent to choose a creature they control, and then we get control of it. And then we can choose a creature we control, and each other creature we control becomes a copy of that creature until end of turn. So, what does this mean? With all of the 1/1 tokens we have, we are going to either use our own biggest, baddest, toughest creature, let's say Haughty Jin as an example, and then we are going to turn all of our creatures into copies of Haughty Jin. Now they are all flyers with like +10 power because of the instants and sorceries we have cast through the turn. Now Sakashima's Will is going to just get us straight through everything. This is why cards like Survival's Bond are important. Returning a non-creature card from our graveyard to our hand is important because we can get cards like the Haughty Jin or the Mizzix of its Magus. But the Jin is important mostly because this card uniquely is not a legendary one. Most of the creatures in our deck are legendary or do not benefit from stacking up the way he does. So Sakashima's Will plus Haughty Jin is just an instant win in our deck. Super simple. Or we just take, somebody's only got one creature on the board and it's like a big dinosaur. Then all of our creatures are dinosaurs. Sakashima's Will turns a board of 1/1s into a board of death. Then we have Mishra's Onslaught. Choose one. Creatures you control get 2/0 until end of turn, or create 2 1/1 Colorless Soldier artifact creature tokens. This is just going to be cast so that we can say that our board gets 2/0. All of our little 1/1 creatures spawned by Riku. All of our little 2/2 creatures spawned by Talrin. All of our little 3/3 creatures spawned by Magnus the Red. All of those are going to be stacked up and ready to pounce on our opponents when we cast that card. So that is the entirety of the deck, not counting lands, but we do need to get into our lands because we are running a very interesting land section. Also, we have 2 other things we have to talk about before we get into anything else. We do have a small protection section because our commander is important, and this is my bad for not having these where they were supposed to be. Champion's Helm and Mirror Shield. Equipped creature gets hexproof for each of them. With Champion's Helm, it gets 2/0. With Mirror Shield, it gets 0/2 and basically immunity to Death Touch. The reason that these are in the wrong place and I farked up, so typically when I'm organizing my decks, I have the lands in lowercase so that they will always be organized at the bottom of my list, making it very easy for me to find stuff. I accidentally did not capitalize protection for this section, so it ended up getting sorted all the way to the bottom. That is on me. Apologies for that. But let's get into the lands we are using. We are running a decent bit of basic lands, 4 of each: forest, mountain, and island. Remember, we do have a lot of basic land fetch in the deck, so do not go down on basic lands as you are doing deck upgrades. Please remember to keep basic lands available for you to ramp out. Then in the dual land section, we have Eroded Canyon because it is a desert, and we have desert fetching in the deck. Bristling Backwoods because we have desert fetching in the deck, and Lush Oasis, again, because we have desert fetching. I do not think deserts are good budget deck lands, but in Riku specifically, one of our modal spells cares about deserts, so we do have some deserts here. We also have Mossfire Valley, Ferris Lake, and Overflowing Basin as our lands that are filter lands in the deck. Now that the Ferris Lake and Overflowing Basin are getting printed in more precons going forward, their price will continue to drop. Then we have the reveal lands, Vine Glimmer Snarl, Frostboil Snarl, and Game Trail. And then, of course, we have a single copy of Cinderglade because it is a Tango land that comes into play untapped, which is important for us. And it does say Mountain Forest, so if you upgrade the deck and start caring about forests with things like 3 visits, then this is a target for those. Then we have 9 fetching lands in the deck, starting with Promising Vein, which is a cave. Remember, we did have a modal spell that cared about deserts and a modal spell that cared about caves. So Promising Vein is a cave that can be grabbed. Esper Panorama, Grixis Panorama, Naya Panorama, Bant Panorama, and Shire Terrace and Promising Vein are all basically the same card. They come into play untapped. They give us mana when we need it, and we can also use them to get other basic lands out of our deck. Myriad Landscape can do the same, but it comes into play tapped and gets 2 basic lands out of our deck for ramping. Then we have Escape Tunnel and Terramorphic Expanse as easy access to any of our basic lands we need. If you feel like you need more, please feel free to throw the Evolving Wilds in here as well. Then in the Omni Land section, we have Command Tower, Exotic Orchard, and Mirage Mesa, because it is a desert, and of course, we do need a couple of deserts in the deck for our modal spells to hit. So Mirage Mesa lets us choose a color, and it enters tapped, but we add a mana of any of the chosen colors when we have it. Speaking of caves and deserts, our utility lands are also caves and deserts because they are searchable, and the caves and deserts we have chosen both do the same thing: Pit of Offering and Scavenging Grounds. So Scavenging Grounds lets you sack a desert to exile all graveyards. This is super powerful in this kind of deck. And Pit of Offerings enters the battlefield tapped, but it lets you exile 3 target cards from a graveyard when it touches the battlefield. So it is a very, very powerful mini Bojuka Bog in decks that are not black and otherwise needed. Also, it gets the colors of any of the cards that you threw away, which is also super powerful in the deck. But let's say you wanted to upgrade the deck a little further, you wanted to put a little more oomph in the deck. What would you do? Well, there are a couple of budget cards that I would automatically throw in. One of them is, of course, Atarka's Command. Choose 2 creatures you control, get 1/1 and reach until end of turn, or put a land from your hand onto the battlefield, or deal 3 damage to each opponent, or your opponents can't gain life this turn. Just another way to make our tokens super powerful. It is $1.20, so it very well goes over our deck's budget with how we have the deck built. Also, we are a Spellslinger deck, so cards like Stormkiln Artist will do a lot of good as well if you are upgrading the deck and you have one of these already, and you can fit it in the deck, generally speaking. But those are not the only cards that I would add in. I would also add in a Storm of Saruman to copy our spells even more, and Storm has Ward on it, so that's incredibly helpful as well. I would also suggest cards like Burgi, God of Storytelling, to add to our mana pool as we are casting through our deck, and Krark the Thumbless as well. And you know what? Veyran, Voice of Duality, would do very well in the deck on top of that, and her price has been dropped down quite a bit, thankfully. And a Thunderclap Drake, also out of Thunder Junction, will do you a lot of good as well. Very, very powerful card, very, very strong effect, and it lowers the cost of our instants and sorceries, which is ever more important with the kind of deck that we are playing. And hey, maybe you can add a Rude Awakening into the deck too, as a way to turn your lands into powerful creatures. Again, just doubling up on those effects as you go. Probably some more very important cards to add is, as you are increasing the ways the deck can copy stuff, a Twinning Staff will be very powerful, and a Primal Amulet as another way of copying cards is also ridiculously powerful. And if you are playing with a playgroup that's okay with it, an Isochron Scepter grabbing any of the Spree cards would be helpful, because you exile the instant card with its mana cost, the top card of its mana cost, period. And you're always allowed to play additional costs, so the Isochron Scepter will do you a lot of good as well. And finally, if you want a way to really, really benefit from the high mana cost of our cards, then alongside Talrand, you can even drop a Shark Typhoon into the deck somewhere as well, because this will give you a ton of extra oomph to your spells, as it does read the CMC of the spell. And a lot of the modal spells we are playing have a very, very large CMC. But with all that said, that is my Riku deck. $15, or technically $16.50 because of timing problems. Hopefully you guys enjoyed. Let me know what you think in the comment section below. Let me know what upgrades you would go and use. Let me know what angle you took the deck yourself, and I hope you all are having a wonderful time. Thank you all for watching my stuff, and insert end of video tagline here. Hey, I just quickly want to give a thank you to all of my wonderful patrons who keep this show running. YouTube and Twitch are a pretty bumpy ride at the best of times, and the stability that Patreon provides me is worth more than I can say here. I'd also like to thank each and every one of my $20 and up patrons here, and they would be Red Joker, Blitzkrieg, Cameron, Dren, Jemshin, Smiling DM, Poundini, Nabbity Babbity, Naomi, Isaac, Agamotto, Jordan, Ravi, Giuni, Kiratorian, Prisma, all of you, Sagitt, I'm not saying that part, and Starlight. And finally, thank you to everyone else that helps keep this channel alive. While you're here, why not check out another video? And thank you for watching.